Here's today's In Touch devotion.
Today's scripture reading is based on the book of Joel. While we encourage you to read all 3 chapters, our presentation here is quite condensed. We begin in chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. Hear this, you elders, and listen, all inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this happened in your days? Or in your father's days? Tell your sons about it, and have your sons tell their sons, and their sons the next generation. What the gnawing locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten, and what the swarming locust has left, the creeping locust has eaten, and what the creeping locust has left, the stripping locust has eaten. For a nation has invaded my land, mighty and without number. Now return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in mercy, and relenting of catastrophe. Then the Lord will be zealous for his land, and will have compassion for his people. The Lord will answer and say to his people, Behold, I am going to send you grain, new wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied in full with them. And I will never again make you a disgrace among the nations. So shout for joy, you sons of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given you the early rain for your vindication. The threshing floors will be full of grain, and the vats will overflow with the new wine and oil. Then I will compensate you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten. It will come about after this that I will pour out my Spirit on all mankind, and it will come about that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling on Zion, my holy mountain. So Jerusalem will be holy, and strangers will no longer pass through it. And on that day the mountains will drip with sweet wine, and the hills will flow with milk, and all the brooks of Judah will flow with water, and a spring will go out from the house of the Lord and water the valley of Shittim.
More often than not, waiting involves a lot of stress, especially when we don't know how long it will be until the holding pattern ends. During the wait, those of us who are believers sometimes turn away from God and yearn for a time when things felt easier. But what if we turned towards God and looked forward instead? The prophet Joel spoke to God's people during a challenging time when their land had been invaded by locusts. Livelihoods were destroyed by drought and pestilence, and people were starving. Those were days full of destruction, darkness, and utter gloom. Yet God did not point them back to the good old days. Instead, he pointed them to the future, to himself. He called them to return to him and reminded them that a day of vindication and redemption would ultimately come. And while it's true that ultimately could be generations away, there's comfort in knowing his promise of restoration is certain. On the day Christ returns to usher his followers to heaven, there will be tremendous rejoicing. Vats will overflow, and everyone who has called on the name of the Lord for salvation will be safely home with him forever. By turning our eyes forward towards that certain yet maybe far-off day, may we too find the strength to keep waiting.